Hello, everyone. This is Thomas King. I did my paper on Marie Ragghianti. She was mentioned a couple times in our book, The Responsible Administrator. So I wanted to take a closer look at her and what she did. Here's a couple of pictures of her. So this was the late 1970s. Marie was the chair of the Tennessee Board of Pardons and Paroles. She was appointed in 1976, and then she was fired by Governor Ray Bland, pictured there, only after serving for 14 months. So why was she fired? Well, she had uncovered a big scandal where the governor and members of his staff were selling pardons and paroles and clemencies to violent criminals, some of them double murderers. Um, they were also blocking the extradition of a man on the staff named Bill Thompson, who had also been indicted for robbery in Georgia. Crazy. So the goal of the paper was to look at Marie's past leading up to her decision to blow the whistle on the scandal and to answer the question if I were be able to do the same thing if I were in her position. I work closely with the Ohio Pro Board, and I may be on the Pro Board someday. Who knows? So I just wanted to take a closer look at this case and see if I'd be able to do the same thing. So Marie's life, she was born in 1942 to a middle-class Catholic family in Florida. She was a beauty pageant winner and popular with the boys. The boys were fighting over her on a regular basis. And her father told her one day she had a choice between being genuine and superficial, and she had to learn the difference. I think that played a part in her decisions later on in life, so I felt a need to include it. Virginia, her mother, was paralyzed by a tumor in her lower back when Marie was 10. But Virginia still didn't let that keep her down. She went back to school, got a degree in counseling, and helped other handicapped people. So one example for Marie to follow. Roque, her left Virginia, her mother, when Marie was in her last year of high school for another woman. And Marie was concerned about how that would affect her younger sister, Rose. And so Marie was pretty persistent and eventually talked him into coming back home for Rose's sake. So I think that played a part in it as well, in her decisions later on in life. Marie eventually married a man named David Ragghianti, and shortly after they got married, he was abusive. She was in school at the time in New York. She dropped out of school and chose to be a wife and eventually a mother. I guess that is typical of what the expectation of a lot of women was in the 70s. So they had 3 children. First one was Dante, Teresa, and Ricky. Eventually, she left David, and her last straw was when he had pulled a knife on her in front of the 3 children that they had and threatened to kill her. She refused to put her children in that position again. How hard it must have been for her. So that was one of her biggest struggles. I think that played a huge role in not caving to these men later on when she made the hard decisions to blow the whistle as well. She had already been threatened by someone she cared about the most. So what would these men be able to do to her? So Marie's youngest son inhaled what Marie knew was a pistachio shell and was unable to breathe. So there was the story goes that there was pistachio shells on the floor of the car. Marie knew they were there, and he had inhaled one and was having trouble breathing. So like any parent, she's freaking out. She wants to get into the hospital and get the problem solved, right? Get the shell out of there. Well, the doctors couldn't find it. And matter of fact, they said it wasn't a shell, it's something else. And before they left, Ricky was breathing fine. Left the hospital. But he would go back and forth having these bouts with being able to breathe and not being able to breathe. So after months of this, and bills were piling up, medical bills, that were being paid by her husband's insurance. She made a vow to never let material considerations prevent her from doing the right thing. And she also realized that she could be right about the source of her son's illness when others in authority could be wrong. Because eventually they found a pistachio shell covered in mucus, and it kept moving when they kept trying to find it. So she never gave up, and eventually her son recovered and it was fine. I think that played a huge role in her decisions as well. So, divorced at this point, or getting divorced, and trying to figure out how to survive as a single mother, she said, I need to go back to school. She ended up getting a scholarship to Vanderbilt University and graduated with a degree in psychology and literature in 1974. Now, throughout that time, she had worked several part-time jobs, and mom was even helping Virginia. Her mother was even helping watch the kids while she did that. She got a job shortly after through a friend named Eddie Sisk. She was writing extraditions for the state of Tennessee. So it wasn't long after that, a couple years, that she was appointed as chairperson of the Tennessee Board of Pardons and Paroles. In that 2 years, though, she noticed some strange things happening. She would be asked to write certain paperwork for certain extraditions she thought was inappropriate, or certain clemency paperwork she thought was inappropriate. But she figured these guys knew what they were doing. They'd been in public service longer than she had. So maybe they knew something that she didn't. So when she was appointed as chairperson, she was surprised and she accepted it, thinking that she could do some real good. But there's always a ulterior motive to people's. Nobody gets a chairperson of a major board after 2 years unless something shady's happening, in my opinion. So the scandal. So Governor Blanton and members of his administration were involved in selling clemencies. And basically, clemency is you get out of prison early, right? So the clemency process is simple. It's the inmate that's in prison files a clemency through the Board of Pardons and Paroles in Tennessee at this time. The board has a responsibility to make a recommendation to the governor. The governor can then approve or disapprove the clemency. So the process is it has to go through the board. So the people involved in this were actually Governor Blanton, Eddie Sisk, the Governor Blanton's general counsel, Charlie Benson, Sisk's assistant that he had hired, and then Bill Thompson. He was a special advisor to the governor. He's also the cat that was avoiding extradition from robbery charges to Georgia. So shortly after starting as chairperson, Marie heard about someone fitting Bill Thompson's description selling clemencies. So she took this information to Eddie Sisk and Charlie Benson, and they both blew her off and said, nah, don't pay attention to it, couldn't have been him, blah, 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 right? But shortly after that, Sisk and Benson start asking Marie to make inappropriate clemency recommendations to the governor. And she refused. She said, there's no way. These guys have to at least serve half their time to get parole. They haven't even been in prison long enough for that, much less a clemency. So she would refuse. So what did Marie do in response? Well, at this point, she wasn't really sure if the governor was involved yet. So she took her concerns to the governor. When she got blew off basically by the governor, and he said, I'll look into it, how people placate other people. That's basically what he did. She's like, this isn't right. This is bad. So once she was convinced that even the governor was involved, she took her concerns to the FBI. In October 1976, the FBI raided the Blanton administration's office looking for files that were supposedly going to be destroyed. They didn't find anything substantial, and even though a grand jury took place, there was no indictments handed down. You know what happens after this, right? They know somebody said something. So what's changed, right? So after this, retaliation was relentless, and there were files missing from her office because she was the only one in the administration that had stood up and said, "No, I'm not doing this stuff. I'm not following through. I'm not making these recommendations." She was even offered another position by Charlie Benson to stay quiet. She refused to take it. She was asked to resign several times. She refused to do it. So even though she refused to resign, um, they kept intimidating her. The retaliation was relentless. She was pulled over several times by several different law enforcement agencies. One eventually gave her a breathalyzer, and she failed it, and they arrested her. She figured at this point it was time to hire an attorney. So she hired someone she'd heard about, and she knew was tough. Well, his name was Fred Thompson. So Fred Thompson was one of the prosecutors in the Watergate scandal. Fred was also, you can see his picture there. He became a famous actor. He was a politician, even had to run for president. As a matter of fact, Fred's first acting job was as himself in the movie made about Marie's story, aptly named Marie. Anyway, so Blanton finally fired Marie after only being on the board for 14 months. And he came up with some excuses. He said that Blanton accused Marie of being ineffective as a chairperson, and had inappropriately billed the state over $7,000 in expenses. So Marie and Fred were not happy about it, so they sued for wrongful termination, even though, in her position, she served at the pleasure of the governor. They set out to prove that his claims were wrong. Marie and Fred won. They won their case. And the jury said that she had been fired capriciously by the governor of Blanton and was reinstated, and compensation was ordered for her lost pay. So what happened? So shortly after the trial, Thompson and Sisk were arrested on bribery charges. So the FBI had followed through on their investigation and came up with some more information and actually came down with indictments. And Thompson and Sisk ended up serving both 5 years in prison. Thompson was even extradited back to Georgia on the robbery charges. The case against Charlie Benson was dismissed because the government wasn't able to prove sufficient evidence of his involvement. And then Blanton himself was even arrested and eventually was convicted and served 3 years in prison for other offenses that he committed while governor. The scariest part about this whole thing was the failure of the justice system in Tennessee. The way it was set up. So the FBI uncovered that Blanton had signed more than 600 clemencies during his time in office. He wasn't in office very long, 4 years. He signed so many that the new governor had to be sworn in 3 days early to keep Blanton from signing more of them. And these are unprecedented in Tennessee history. That's the scary part. You had murderers literally getting away with murder. So what were the results? Some of the other results was, they saw Marie as unpredictable. And so no other administration in Tennessee wanted to hire her to do anything else after the governor was fired and arrested. So she never worked in state government again. She was always upset about that. She figured if she was a man, she would have been treated differently, and I tend to agree with that. If she was a man, she would have been seen as brave. Because she was a woman, she was called unpredictable, which we both know is crap. But anyway, She worked as a teacher, as at a college, so she taught at college level. She was a writer, a presenter. You can see her presenting there, and a drug rehabilitation counselor. Some of her children gotten into drugs when they were younger, so she felt a passion to work in that field as well. She was instrumental in making sure that several external controls were made by the parole board in Tennessee to make this harder from happening again. There were 3 seats on the board when she was on it. It got expanded to 5. 4 of those seats are appointed by the governor. 1 is appointed by the legislature, and there's more oversight and an independent budget for the board. So they're not controlled by the Department of Corrections. So she helped with a lot of those things, and she was clear that she was going to be relentless till those changes were made, and she was. What an amazing person. So analysis. I think all of her life experiences led her to make the decisions she made. Marie felt a subjective responsibility to do what was best for the citizens of Tennessee. Bland, Sisk, and Benson, and Thompson, I don't think they could control her. They thought they could control her. And this was the late 1970s, so you got to think about it. They didn't have a lot of respect for women in the workplace anyway. So they thought she would just fall in line and do what she was told, being a single mother of 3 children. Well, she didn't do that. Remember, you're talking about a domestic violence survivor and somebody who was right about her child's illness and was relentless in that. If she could do those 2 things, she's certainly not going to back down from these characters. That's why I found her so intriguing. And I work as a victim advocate daily, and I work with domestic violence victims daily. So I find her story very intriguing and very empowering. She was incredibly brave, and she went above and beyond what she really needed to do. She could have just quit and walked away, right? Got a different job and said, "This is nuts. This is too much." But she didn't do that. She stayed and she fought the good fight. So I continue to learn from this example. I think all of us can. And that's why I wanted to present it to you guys. And I certainly wanted to, research her a little bit more because of my work with the Ohio Parole Board and my future career path. So, and there's the book. It was written by Peter Moss. It's over there on the far right. He was the author of Serpico. If you know who Frank Serpico was, he was the detective in New York who refused to take bribes. So he wrote the book on him, and then he wrote the book on Marie as well. Sissy Spacek played Marie in her movie, and there's the movie there. There's a picture of the movie, and there's the 3 of them together: Sissy Spacek, Marie Ragghianti, and Fred Thompson. So, and then there's all my references. If you wanted to take a look at those as well. So, thank you and take care. Bye-bye.